What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the Apathy Apostle here, and we are back with episode 148 of the video game therapy series. Um, ironically, actually, I'm going to talk about apathy, but I don't want to be the apostle of apathy. I will say, not that I don't want to make predictions. I make predictions all the time, so I'm gonna make a prediction here. I guess what I'm alleging. But I think like it used to be, cool to like, be like, I'm not gonna say like be anti-establishment, but just like, I think nihilism used to be kind of cool. Like, oh well, actually nothing matters, or like, oh you have these like, traditional silly values, or like, oh your values are derived from the Bible or from some other book or some other cult or religion or something, and I'm obviously smart enough to know that like nothing truly matters. So I'm actually Giga Chad, nihilist. Whereas now I think nihilism has become so mainstream, and I actually, I used to be more, I'll say nihilistic about nihilism, or just more apathetic towards nihilism, meaning that I didn't view it as a threat. I viewed it mostly as like a non-constructive worldview, because my argument being that someone that thinks nothing matters isn't going to try to do that much. Now, whether or not they're right, it kind of is like, what's the answer to the universe? I don't know. So it's not like they're wrong in saying that nothing matters, because it is possible that they are right, but like we don't know. So it's like if they're just kind of assuming that nothing does matter and there is no meaning to the universe, as if that's like a proven fact, where I don't think it's a proven fact. I think that it's an alleged fact only because no other answer is satisfactory, meaning that like no, whether it's a biblical answer or an answer about any other ways is like, in terms of how you derive meaning from life, is satisfactory to a nihilist. So I thought of it more in that way, but I'm kind of beginning to view it with more just contempt, as not more contempt, or just more with caution. Maybe contempt is probably the wrong word. Caution, I say, because I truly, I think I want to take it a step further than it being a kind of a like a non-practical life philosophy. Like, I don't think it really helps you to be a nihilist. I can like, I think it can help you if you're, maybe the type of person that could be a nihilist and be okay is someone that is extremely high in anxiety and extremely high motivating factors to do things. So they're, highly excitable, and they're very very unlikely to be lazy or lethargic. The problem people being that people that would become nihilists are ones that are, maybe more lazy, or not anxious in general. So a lack of anxiety and a nihilistic philosophy really don't bond well, in the sense that that person will probably be completely content with doing nothing, which is potentially more dangerous than, I guess the higher strung person. But regardless, the whole reason that any of this is worth discussing is I just think in general people are, nihilism is becoming more cool, and I think it'll be kind of our duty or our job, and I'm being, talking collectively about, I guess, people of my generation or of this time period, that maybe grew up, as nihilism kind of transitioned into fashion, will be ironically kind of giving people like reasons to not think everything is gay, right? Because I guess one way of looking at nihilism, and this is a very silly like Zoomer meme way of looking at it, is just like, oh no, actually everything's just gay. Like, I don't care. Not everything's kind of gay. Like, oh, it's kind of gay. Like nothing is cool. Everything is like, everything can be uncool. It's the same as almost like it's almost like a teenager philosophy. And also, be funny to, look at philosophies like that. Like idealism might be more of like a child, whereas like the adolescent philosophy is certainly the nihilist. But I think, in maturity or in maturation, I think people don't, live like die as nihilists, I don't think. But it's a very angsty teen philosophy where it's like, well, actually everything's all gay, and like, well, you're doing all this stuff, but like, really, it's all gay. It doesn't mean anything. um, but I think if you have an entire generation of people that all believe that, they're not like even changes that could be made, like, because I think everyone that has accomplished something significant, uh, you know, to use the loose verbiage, but has gone out on a limb, meaning they've made some risk against statistics, or they or against the odds, or just a in general, and maybe not even a statistical, rarity or anomaly, but just an ill-informed or almost a purely intuitive push to have to do something. Um, Meaning that they're motivated by oh geez, um, oh geez, 3 pieces of armor. I lost track of what I was talking about. Hold on a second. Uh, I forgot what I was talking about. Hang on. All right. So basically, what I was trying to say was that if you have an entire generation of people that I guess have a philosophy largely driven by apathy, or just really a nihilistic philosophy, I don't think they're not very mobilizable in terms of creating any kind of positive change. So even if, like, suppose there were, because there have been times throughout history where things have looked really bad, and then kind of through some kind of breakthrough or ingenuity, like we kind of get to the other side, and we're better off, you know, afterwards than we were before. But having seen no way out at the time, and I think some people just kind of blindly believe that, like, oh, we're just kind of, these are almost the accelerationists. That's kind of like, well, the progress of technology will bail us out. Where it's almost like that's just kind of their scapegoat. It's like, well, no matter what, like, even if we make nuclear bombs, like, we're going to make, like, anti-nuclear bombs at the exact same time, so it'll be fine. Like, they almost kind of reduce things to that logic, where it's like they think that they take almost the yin and yang, existence, which I think is a true phenomenon, and is it's something that we can observe. But then they kind of use that to the extreme, where they think everything, therefore, is like will be equal. I'm not even sure that that's like the degree of which they believe, but I think in general they believe so much in this libertarian ideal that it can blind or confuse with reality with whatever the ideal is. And that's true of any kind of, I guess, overarching or just all-encompassing philosophy as a whole. And I'm viewing more of them as I don't even think it's like we can ever arrive at some truly objective ideal. But maybe I used to think that things were like we can get to there's all these different frameworks, and the frameworks, you can think of them as individual philosophies. Maybe it's just like a little quote, or maybe it's just like a series of thoughts or ideas, or even like a literary work of some kind. But all these are different frameworks in which maybe the world can be conceptualized as, and they're all like, I'll say they're all valid frameworks, in the sense that, like, they're conceivable. Now, valid meaning doesn't mean that they're accurate. Like, you could have like I don't know, you could have a worldview that's highly, based on, prejudices of sex or race, and it could be accurate, not because of, it could be accurate in spite of those, potentially problematic ways of measuring, of things. So I'm not saying that any model is valid just because it's always accurate, but a valid model is something that at least has some kind of predictive power in terms of modeling something. So this could be as rudimentary or simple as just like, well, whatever the Bible says is real. To something as advanced as like, well, it's advanced quantum mechanics. It's like, here are all the rules, within everything. And I realize that I'm taking some liberty in combining those, like combining like a very scientific theory with like a religious one. But the point is that they're both frameworks under which we can assess different questions. And sometimes these questions, like, are very objective, and are that they make themselves very privy to science's demands, like how many inches are in a mile. It's like, all right, well, there's a scientific way we can go about figuring this out. We can do the measurements, and obviously that fact is well known. But if we wanted to validate that as a scientific measure, we could. Whereas, like, how long is, how many feet are in a mile, how many inches in a mile, wouldn't be a very useful question to in the framework of like Christianity. Like, the Bible has the answers. That would be a pretty useless framework in that context. So I viewed all these different kinds of philosophies and different like flavors of them just as frameworks to view different problems throughout the world. And so part of the questions is like, all right, what questions are you asking yourself, and then therefore, like, what framework is most applicable or most useful to you at this time. And so really, the true wisdom would be then just knowing, understanding what frameworks you have at your disposal. So like having a large selection of potential frameworks under which you could I guess assess something, and then like B, like the experience to know when to apply said frameworks. So but using that, you could even argue that like ChatGPT is very wise because sure, it has knowledge of all these frameworks, and it could have some very crude way to approximate like when you should use X framework or Y framework over Z or something else. And in that sense, I would say I would grant points at least on that argument. On its face, but then I would argue that there is a very very different a life well lived of a human versus a life well lived of a machine is very different, and like a machine itself doesn't have the same like well lived life aspirations. I think biologically or genetically that a human would, meaning that like we, like I don't know, since like our it's almost like the mystery, since the mystery of our creation is unknown. Like this is almost one way to potentially draw an inequivalence between. Not that I'm out here searching for inequivalencies between humans and technology, but in general, I think the less we can anthropomorphize ourselves or anthropomorphize computers and our technology, the better we're going to be just in general. I think just for layman's sake, we should avoid trying to anthropomorphize technology, only because it's like, well, it's thinking. It's like it is not like you're assigning it agency and its ability to think. We don't even know what thinking. Either way, one way to potentially look at this is that since we don't know, like our creation is a mystery, and I'll put the mystery in quotes, I guess, if you're like a Darwinian absolutist and you think that their evolution is the only true only answer and like period. There's nothing like even that like, but I think even within evolution, like there's still so many variables we haven't really figured out. So like if, for example, like the people even looked at evolution data and say that like random mutations wouldn't really result in this evolutionary timeline. Like the timeline, if the mutations were random, like they wouldn't be, we wouldn't have, this wouldn't be the timeline that you would arrive at. And I think this is also kind of, people don't really know what random means. Like, well, it's actually not random; it's selective. But like the idea of like, of a random mutation happens, and then if it's a positive help for the environment, then it is then selected in the gene pool. I think even with like the most accurate way to represent that, and I think the premise of it is true, but I think there may be something maybe, I'll say guiding evolution, meaning that something that speeds up the quote unquote random mutation process that is not well understood. So in that sense, I won't say that like, evolution is, is finished or whatever. Either way, we don't really know where we came from, and we don't really have our origin. However, like ChatGPT, like if you were to like give it its birth story or like how it exists or like how it works, you could explain it to itself. And like even if, and I'm not going to say that it would be able to understand itself. Now, it would be able to like store text that would include a description that is the description of it as a technology. Like, but is that the same as like ChatGPT knowing what ChatGPT is? Like, I don't think so. I don't think you could give it, the title, well, it knows itself. Even so, suppose that you were an AI booster and you did think that like it's when it thinks, or when it knows, it knows. But by that logic, you would then have to admit that the ChatGPT is capable of understanding itself in its entirety, which is not something that humans are able to do. So either there's some mix-up in our logic, or humans must be more complicated or complex than machines, which I think, with the mix of chemical, biological, physical, and I'll say psychological attributes, I don't think people would agree with that, but I think some people view it as simply a matter of time and complexity, where others view it as a fundamentally impossible problem. So, like, the answer of, like, is it possible to replicate a human? I would, again, the barometer of, like, possible is, like, how many millions of years, or, like, in what possible utopia. Like, I could imagine some case where it's like it does happen, but again, that imaginary land to me feels fake. Whereas I think some people might imagine that, and that imaginary land would feel real. And maybe I just don't have a strong enough imagination to imagine a future in which we could completely replicate humans. But given the technology we have now, and how close we are to, or how close it feels like we are to like nuclear Armageddon, and the fact that we're unable to recreate even like simpler life forms like an ant or a bird or something. And we've made drones that fly and are shaped like birds, but we haven't like actually produced like a bird egg that then grows into a bird. Like that, like something that was completely artificial. Like, nature is still running things. Like most all the organisms that exist are still like, natural. I think the closest we've done to true like, I guess technological genetics, or just applying technology to genetics in general has been like GMOs and like foods. Like I think that's probably closest we have to actually like human created alien species would be, the soybeans or whatever the people are eating. Um, so I don't know. It's I think it's dangerous. I think at some point we're gonna have to reteach the children or the descendants like I think these bits about things being meaningful and like why things are important and like these kind of values that nihilists are easy to extol because it's very easy to throw especially once you're kind of in the comfort of this the logic of nihilism, which I think is a transition that that maybe every person that dabbles in philosophy goes into, is that you find great comfort in knowing that nothing matters. So that means that none of your mistakes were important, and that that can be comforting again if you're a very anxious person, and that causes a lot of trouble for you knowing that things don't matter. And if that helps you get out of bed, then great. But I think a lot of people can almost use nihilism as an excuse to not fulfill their potential, which is really all I want. Like if I were if I, not even if I were president, if I were some omnipotent god, if I was elevated to some god status and they said, for whatever reason, you're going to be the main character of our little show and we're giving you full reign over the rest of humanity. It's like, what would I want? What would I do? It's like, I want world peace. No, what I would really say is I want people to I would want to create a world in which people are able to aspire and then like fight, or not fight, but work towards those aspirations. Like have aspirations in mind, and the aspirations are, I think it has to be entirely individualized. Like I'm not going to say, well, everyone needs to bench 225. Like that's a that's a requirement. I'm not gonna It's not going to be arbitrary, in that sense. But I want people striving for things, that again they themselves think are great or are worthwhile. And again, I don't want to necessarily be the barometer of what's a worthwhile expenditure. Like if somebody's true passion of understanding is like the maximum number of times somebody can ejaculate in a day or something. Like again, I think I would wish the world were different, and if I were omnipotent enough to change those values about that person or just humanity in general, I think I would. But in general, I would want people striving for the best version of themselves and whatever enables themselves to be that best version. Now, my argument would be that this person who's trying to Jack Max or whatever, they're, trying to ejaculate the maximum number of times that they can, I would argue is not that isn't towards their best potential. And I think people implicitly have, they have ideas about what, is what maximizing potential means. But, to me, it is more of an intuitive thing than it is anything objective. Now, there are objective measurements. I think a lot of our scientific, medical measurements of health, like, that to me is even a proxy on some level for that. Like how well that you take care of yourself. Because the other way I've even been thinking about just our bodies in general, I think people are like, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm again being too prude with this, but I think people they're not really even really happy to be alive. It doesn't seem like life is a gift to to most people. And again, maybe this is just a product of the times, and I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this myself, but there seems to be a lack of gratitude for life in general, and people are very like just nonchalant. They don't really care, and I think people need to kind of there needs to be some way back that people are kind of waking up and understand how much of a gift. I think we should view life as more of a privilege that we need to earn each day, and part of earning that the privilege of life is like being in shape and treating yourself well, eating the best you can. Obviously, like if you're a prisoner or something, there's just little you can do. But in general, people that have freedom, which is most people that I see that again look ungrateful, would be again trying like thinking of it. You have to earn your existence. It's not like you wake up in the morning and you're like, God, I feel awful. Like this is hell. Why am I being tortured through this? It's like great, I have this is an opportunity, like I need to, but I have to earn this, I have to treat my, and, but maybe it's, again, maybe it's more of a psychological thing where it's like our ancestors, because of, comparatively how much, I guess better their lives could get through work, were very easily motivated, and they kind of got a lot of these, you know, they met a lot of these goals that were like difficult, but like you could still, achieve with a certain amount of effort. Whereas now it feels like goals fall into either, either the category, it's like the normal distribution bell curve, like either the category of like, this is an unfathomable problem out so far outside of your range of influence. There's literally no point in you even talking about this, or like this is such an easy, trivial issue that there's no use in even calling this a problem or writing it down because it's this is easy. It's like feeding yourself is trivial. Whereas that maybe used to be it used to be a point of pride for people because it was difficult and like they could put effort in, but they it was also possible and you could do it, and most people did it, so it wasn't like it was super unlikely. Everyone, if you worked at it and you're kind of we were kind of built for doing that kind of stuff anyway. Like we have the genetics of these hunter gatherers and working with groups. So it's not like that would be a foreign thing for us. It's like I think sitting in a cubicle and learning Excel or Vim or something, as much as I love Vim, that's more unnatural than than hunting. As much as I you know as much as we like to think that the civilized people are the ones that are programming, and the uncivilized ticks are the ones hunting. We're probably we're built as hunters, right? Like biologically, we evolved as hunters. Again, whatever timeline of evolution you have, or whether it was a guided evolution or a truly random one, which I think the idea of it of being a non-random evolution would be interesting. And maybe I've gone too far down like I'll say a skeptic rabbit hole, but I do find myself questioning more of like not the fundamental theories of science, but just like I'll say like the fundamentals extensions of these theories, because I think I would agree that the framework itself, the current framework, whether it is whether it's Einstein's theory of relativity or either even Newtonian physics on a smaller scale or whatever, I think obviously the framework itself has a ton of predictive explanatory value, but obviously in both of those cases they're not like exact perfect like frameworks, and they're also like fundamentally flawed in some way. Whereas I think like um whatever the superseding framework is, because presumably again this is just kind of maybe like the law of science in some ways, like presumably you'd think that at some point another theory comes along that dethrones that. Now it might be a long time, we might all be dead by the time we have another, breakthrough of of that kind. But it's still like the way that we kind of intend science to work. But I mean, one part of me even wonders if like if there isn't enough, I'll say like internal dissent among these things. There's not enough people looking for these, entirely like wholly entirely different theories, right? Like where I think if you're a physics grad student, I think you'd sound silly if you're like, oh yeah, well, I'm trying to come up with another a theory that replaces Einstein's theory of relativity. Like if you told somebody that, they'd be like, dude, you're an idiot. Like you think you're gonna dethrone like the king, the OG Giga Chad. Like you think you're gonna have a theory that's gonna beat Einstein, and like and I think instead of treating that person with like ridicule or like or even just like I think more people should be doing like be trying things like that. But I think a move like that would be career suicide within academia if you were genuinely like, oh yeah, I want to create a different, like I'm not happy with the theory of relativity, I'm gonna make a new one. you know or even like again, because it's like even the conception of that idea is still like someone's like, well, do you have what is the idea, like do you have something, or are you is that like what you're actually trying to do? But I think people aren't even looking for that in that sense. And maybe the advent of science is more random. It's not it's not so much as like people have to look for what they find. It's more accidental. But I think people in general are now more, I guess, dogmatic in their thinking, and they're more concerned with the. This is just a larger point about academia in general, and this is I guess I'll remove this from science. I mean, this isn't necessarily about science itself. This is more about the institution of science. So that being, academia being the science institutionalized. Regardless, I think it has become more of a social, and you can read that as political game, but not political in like terms of politics strictly, but political in terms of winning points. It's about papers, and it's about writing more papers than the other person, and the funding. With different industries that fund different papers, and the number like scoring points that way, where it's like, oh, this is so and so's uncle, and then like you gotta get in good with them because they control, the funds of these, the meat companies that fund the meat studies or something. I think it's much more political in that sense, where there isn't good science is still done. I'm not saying that there's not a single good scientist left, or that everybody's like fabricating data and just making everything up. I'm not saying that at all. But I do think in general there's far too much of that. Of the political flavor of career progression that I think I don't know spells doesn't spell long term success for that as whole. Because I think in many worlds, and maybe my life's not over, obviously. Um, Unless I guess I get shot as soon as I post this video. But yeah, I think there's a world in which I was really drawn to academic life, of the idea of like being a scientist and understanding things, and having a laboratory and studying things that were of interest to me. I think there is maybe a part of every little autistic engineer that does like that comfort, kind of having their own little lab, and their own little, almost their own little understanding and field of science. But now that it's so like it's also so industrialified, like you can't study anything that doesn't have like immediate economic, or like I guess economic incentives that are arguable to a venture capitalist. Like if I can't convince somebody at the meatpacking facility that this is a worthwhile study to do on something adjacent to meats or nitrates or something, then there's no way that like I'm getting any of the funding to actually do this research. Or I can do the research I want, but just not make any money and not make any progress, with your career. So you're not going to be able to do the studies that you want to do, because it traps these people, like people that get into like career maxing or something. I understand the allure where it's like, well, like I know what I want to do, but I need to like get these. XYZ needs to happen in order for me to do to do ABC. ABC is what I really want to do. But I think they spend so long thinking, well, XYZ is standing in the way of me doing ABC, and then by the time they actually get XYZ, they've forgotten their ABCs, right? That's like, that's the way I look at it, is they forget what they were after the whole time. So it's like you went into this, maybe you went into it like, I don't know, you loved, fire or something, and you wanted to study fire, and you were all these, that was what drew you to it. You were always interested in that. But then like you got a job at, for, I don't know who makes grills. I don't know, Ace Hardware or something, who's making grills. And you I guess got into doing the research on their grills and their meats or something like that. But it never really scratched the itch. But in order for you to like even stay close to your career, you had to make a bunch of sacrifices. These are both like practical, like pragmatic sacrifices. Like you have to move somewhere, or you have to like go to this conference, or do this study. But then also like ethical sacrifices where you're again, not questioning ethics of it, like that you were doing unethical studies on these, hot dogs or something at the grill, but just like you didn't want, you wanted to be like, I don't want to study this, or like you wanted to at least, put something else, but you just bit your tongue because, not because you didn't think it was scientific, or just that, as your supervisor said to, and you didn't want to question it that much, or just, there's many different things that like, but slowly I think you begin to compromise on things. And you still are kind of telling yourself like this ABC, ABC, ABC. These are what I want. But then you're only focused on these XYZs. And I think maybe, I don't know, maybe the whole pill from this whole thing is just that, if you have these ABCs that you're apparently so dead set on, like like make those known both to yourself and to people around you, so that, the people can hold you honest for your ABCs. Like if it's really what you're after, like, let's say I had a friend. Again, hypothetically, it's like I want to be the president of the United States. Like that's my ABC. It's like, okay, great. So like, all right, what are you doing now? It's like, yeah, sure. He's not just gonna like jump into the campaign trail and all of a sudden be voted in. There's many other careers. He probably has to have a whole other secondary career before he could even get into politics. But then if that's still his ABC is to be president, then part of what my duty is to either like remind him of that, to see if he's changed his mind, or for him, for him to realize at some point, if I remind him of the ABCs, that like, oh, these were your ABCs at one point. What happened? Are you a different person? Are you not after those anymore? And some people, they switch their ABCs for their XYZs, which are like, whatever's blocking you. Um, whatever the blockers are. So that sounded very millennial corpo speak. Whatever's blocking you, but then they don't often don't come to the realization that whatever's blocking them is not what they want, right? They want to get rid of those blockers because they want ABC, but if they don't want ABC anymore, or they've forgotten what those are, and they're so focused on XYZ, they can lose that. It's like you see this a lot with like people that like, they all they want is for their family to be happy, but then like, they have like maybe some small money problems, and it's like, oh shit, I need to like focus on my career, and then they double down on their career, and then the family like leaves because he was so, they got distracted on the career, and it just ended up, being all consuming and everything. We're like, well, I'm staying late for the family, and it's like, it's a classic like conundrum where it's like the husband stays late or the wife stays late, and then the other person doesn't, but then it's like they're doing it for the family. They both are doing it for the family, but like one's with the family, the other one's making money for the family that's not there. Either way, it's like very classic archetype. But yeah, I feel like I see that anyway. I'm gonna try to blow through some more of these topics. I have an enormous list I want to actually get through here. This is another interesting thing. In terms of what like, because we all have time throughout the day, and I know that like, I get stuck in this meta thought where I'm thinking about what I'm gonna do, and like thinking about what you're going to do is the opposite of doing anything, which again sounds very obvious, but is still something that, while I can say out loud, I often can't really understand that in my head, right? So like, I'm gonna say that again. It's mostly just for me, but like, planning and thinking about what to do next is the opposite of doing anything. Again, which isn't to say that I should stop planning, or I overplan, or I just spend too much, but I think in general I don't. I don't know. There's a, and maybe this is just more pervasive elsewhere too, because I feel like most people have this like, and they call it perfectionism, and maybe I've called it perfectionism or something, but there is this like, I hate using the word anxiety too, but there's an anxiety with like doing something, and maybe it's due to like just I guess some vague fear of critique, or just fear of social criticism in general, and because the internet has allowed instant international communication and instant international critique, presumably as well, that even the thought of doing something, and the thought of the potential global ramifications of like something dumb you said or whatever, just creates so much so much of a barrier to doing things, that I think maybe causes people not to do them. But either way, my thought around this is that I think you'll get the best at the things that you do anyway, even when you like really really don't want to do them. So like, I'm thinking about the frequency of events that of times where you do something, and sometimes maybe the obligation could be like out of work, right? Like it maybe like, the obligation is work asks you to look at 10 extra x-rays if you're an x-ray tech or something, and so like you genuinely get good at that, because like when you really don't want to do it, you still like say, fuck it, fine, I'm going to do it, whatever, I got to do it for work. But unironically, you actually get really good at that thing. And obviously, that's not just one time that you would do it, even though you don't want to. But I think the number of times that you do something that you don't want to do, but you do it anyway, you'll get comparatively better at that skill than other things. 'Cause I think people have and I have the same like misconception just about this too as well. Just like the things that you like to do are the things that you can get the best at, or the things that you really enjoy doing, or the things that you do the most. Like there are things I do all the time that I probably still am not that good at, right? It's like almost even like something as dumb as like brushing my teeth. I'm sure like if you did, you measured the efficiency of my brush style and speed and direction and stuff like that, I'm sure I'm not, but I do that every day anyway, twice a day. If my dentist is watching, 40 times a day, and I'm always flossing. There's always a thing in my mouth. Anyway, just the number always keeps going up. I wonder when it's going to be like 3 times a day, and it's like after every meal. No, I think it's actually been twice a day for a long time. It's just funny. Either way, I kind of forgot where I got off track. Oh yeah, the things that you do when you really don't want to do them. But I think it's the things. Yeah, you get good at things that you do anyway, like through gritted teeth, pretty much. whatever those things are, whether you like doing them or not. And that's the other thing is like you can like doing something and still like not want to do it at that time, right? Like like I would say I like doing these videos because at the end of it, I'm always I don't know. I'm always satisfied at the end. There's a sex joke there, but I'm not going to make it. I'm always satisfied at the end of these things. But like even during them or even before them, like there are days where I loathe even like the thought of having. And I know this is such a stupid thing to like loathe or even spend time loathing of like doing one of these when it's like obviously no one's making me do this, but and not say that I've gotten better at this or I am good at that, but I think good at it. Maybe it was a bad example because I'm not good at it. But I'm still able to do it. I guess I'm proficient in the sense that most of the time when I am able to, if being good at it is just finishing, then I guess that does count. Either way, there's better examples of things like even like working out or something. It's like you do that even though you really don't feel like it. You're unironically going to get a lot better, and that's just is going to make you like a better athlete, better in shape. If you kind of push through, like pushing through that internal, not adversity, but just like internal, like naysaying of doing it. Speaking of adversity, I think I guess this relates to the whole nihilism talk, but I think apathy in general is the adversity of our generation. Whereas like the generation prior, it might have been like opportunity could have been, the real adversity. Like people didn't have enough opportunity, and that's why, a lot of the boomers and things are, very focused and fixated on, equality of opportunity. But I think most people now don't really think of it in that sense. They kind of know that people get opportunities unfairly, and you're either in the group or you're out of the group. So you either get the lucky opportunities or you don't. So, and there's not, and yeah, like maybe race plays a factor or demographics play a factor, but by and large, it's like you're either in it or you're out. So it doesn't really matter. But I think the adversity that my generation faces more so than previous ones is just not caring and not thinking everything they do is meaningless. And then, even one clear cut example of this would be like the whole like data privacy front, where it's like, well, they have my data anyway. It doesn't matter whether or not I do it. And it's like, well, that attitude is part of the reason why it doesn't matter. Like if everyone thought the way that you think, then yes, it technically doesn't matter. But the difference is if people didn't think the way that you think, then it would matter. So it's like you thinking that makes it not matter in your fucked up world philosophy. But I think trying to convince somebody that it does matter, because if they care, it matters, right? It's almost like they have to. But that logic, while like sound yet circular, doesn't resonate with a lot of people. People don't like that. That's not a very resounding argument for people. Especially once you're kind of very committed and happy with the, like the shield of nihilism. I'll say just the logical shield that you get to put up and be like, well, you have no proof over that or anything else. It's like we have just as equal, reason to believe that, the Earth is 2,000 years old, than we do to believe that turtles run the whole thing, or the turtles all the way down, or really any number of facetious things. But the truth is there are, I'll say, like intuitive facts or just things that we can, intuitive notions about ourselves, the universe, and the world that point in the other direction of that. And I think you have to go against your true inner self quite blatantly to deceive yourself of that truth. Anyway, let me move on to something else here. I guess similar to the other, all these musings on circular logic and things. I do find that I again kind of drawing into this logical direction of nihilism. I think that I used to think that your like logics used to informed your like emotional or your moral decisions. Like your moral decisions were guided by your sense of logic, and your sense of logic is largely, or logic in general, yours or mine, is a largely immutable set of facts and beliefs. Where I think now I think it's more apparent to me. Maybe this is obvious from the get go for other people, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just realizing it now. Is that your logic is it's the other way around. Like your moral beliefs about the world influence how you see what logic is, or like what you even constitute as a logical, thought process. Because even like X follows from Y. Like I think those are things that most people like intuit, and it's like people eat oranges. Oranges are too expensive. so people are starving to death because they can't eat, oranges or something. But like those are also some implicit assumptions that assumes that like A, like everyone can eat oranges, and then like B, people are acquiring oranges with money, and like there's all a number of assumptions in there that most people just intuit and kind of presume as logic. But depending on like what your moral beliefs are, I think you would skip over different sets of those axioms, or different sets of those axioms would be like reprehensible. So, for example, even like the topics of something you might study, whereas like, I don't know, like, maybe even to study something like I guess that's probably not a good example either. I guess like studying like the opposite of what someone would think. So like why communism would be the best, economic philosophy there is. Like like it's not a very, objective, scientific like way to go about things. Is going in with, I guess a certain mindset. But then I think your moral attitudes about communism or about just economic structures as a whole, I think would inform your quote unquote logical reasoning much more than you would think. And I think this is, again, this is kind of an obvious like, no duh, why are you saying this? But I think I'm just trying to implicate the emphasis on on like how this can become, I don't know, how the thinking can quickly become not from borderline illogical to like blatantly illogical, but still like being like this, oh yeah, logic, of course, like a head nod logic, but in reality it's like not clearly not a logical line of thinking. So in general, I think the focus with even with like I guess logical pursuits are still, you can make the argument that logical arguments are still about morality. Like they're still maybe not even moral undertones, but a moral backbone to even quote unquote logical arguments, purely logical arguments, ones that don't have, that are even ones with, we'll even say like mathematical assumptions. Because even mathematical assumptions, again, kind of maybe even assume a Cartesian, obviously you can assume the more like crude mathematical things, like, we're assuming Cartesian coordinates like that. That I understand that's like an obvious, like a mathematical world assumption, like in a Platonic realm. And I think maybe the Platonic realm of mathematics might be one of the only exemptions from like I say like a moral first. But the other thing about the Platonic realm is that it isn't real. Like we use like whenever, and this is just the way I kind of view mathematics, I guess after my studies in it, is that we use math as a tool. Like we say this all the time. We use science as a tool, or we say science. We use math as a tool, but we are using them as tools. Like science isn't a person. So if someone says, I trust science or I believe in the science, that's retarded, because science itself doesn't believe anything. Science is a tool, a methodology, a system of going about to find, to get something, using falsification to get something close to the truth. Like it's almost like we're invalidating theories, but we don't necessarily like endorse any theory. And I even almost would take a Karl Popper view, where it's like we can view all theories as equivalent until they're falsified. So even like two equally like one ridiculous theory about the world that is not falsified versus one like completely reasonable, probably right theory, like they're both should be viewed. They shouldn't, you shouldn't view one above the other. If they're both non-falsified, then they're both like valid, perfectly fine theories, to work with. But regardless, I guess I forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, hang on a second. Oh, sorry. Anyway, what I was saying is we use math as a tool. So we enter into, like, essentially whenever we want to use any kind of mathematical relation, we step into this, like, I guess, Plato, it's called like the Platonic world, or Plato's world or Plato's realm. And not Plato is like DOH, but Plato, like Plato. So Plato's realm is where like the mathematical rules are like real. Like circles are perfect, lines are perfect. There's no problem of like parallel lines being an infinite. Like infinity isn't a problem. It's like it's not really an abstract idea that's innumerable. It's a real thing. And we can do many useful things, like entering into this world, this Platonic realm of mathematics, like this Plato's world. Like we do many, many interesting things that, again, are very, very accurate to the real world. I'm not saying that like math is fake and it's not real, but the world in which math is done isn't real, and those are simply it's simply a representation of anything in Plato's world is a representation of something real. But when you take it out of that, there's obviously factors that you can't or haven't accounted for, and therefore don't get incorporated into that, into those decisions. Um, but in the same realm, like I think we, need to, I just don't think we appreciate the I don't know the limited nature of science in general, and we kind of I don't know, maybe perhaps are it's a classic case of drowning in our own hubris with regard to these things. But I'll circle back to that later at some point. Um, yeah, let me see. I guess no, I've ripped that point a lot. Let me see. Oh yeah, I guess that's an interesting thing. I was thinking about where on the internet are the best, like, I'm not gonna say the best like, I guess I will say the best conversations. Where on the internet are the best conversations being had? And I guess the best conversations, the way I would define that, or the way I would be, are the ones that are the most, again, not the most like provocative, because and I'm not gonna say provocation is necessarily good. But I guess the place with the most not even like the most intellectual merit, because I think some places that get um, are maybe too intertwined with, I'll say academia or in general, or just, like any place that has like a formal set of definitions. There's even there's a forum board, a philosophy forum board called like Less Wrong. I guess being a joke on like, there's no, it's all amount of, wrongness and rightness, or they're all subjective or something like that. And I think that would be, there's a lot of interesting discussion that's being had on that. The issue I have is that a lot of commentators aren't using, I'll say like it's not that it's bad faith arguing, but they argue through the use of a lot of like terms, right? And a lot of these terms are not they're real words in the sense that we have the definitions for them, and even we could even agree on the definitions for them. But the terms themselves obfuscate the targets and the actual like moving pieces of, an argument or something. So I could say like, like the term like person, or any human or any person or any being or any man or something. And you could spend, again, days and days and days trying to like dissect the exact implications of like, all right, what men count as men, or what man or what persons count as persons, or like, do we exclude? So, we talk about like these edge cases and things where I would think the most interesting discussion to me is stuff that isn't necessarily about edge cases. It could be if the edge case is like, but I think more like broad strokes, and then the argumentation strategy is more not even rhetorical, um, but more, working with concrete objects and ideas. So like even like arguing about like nihilism itself, it isn't like, well, nihilism is bad because it's a reductionist philosophy, and a reductionist philosophy is it's like, no, take those, don't make new words for these and then go on arguing using the new words. I want like I want the word, like I want plain simple words. It's like that, at least it can relate to one another and might, have the same essential effect if you were to explain all the words. But I think, creating this I think it creates an artificial and I would argue a needless barrier to entry for people to, argue with these things online. If you require like, a dictionary essentially to be able to to entertain, any of these conversations. Regardless, like I think the location of these most thought provoking conversations would probably be somewhere like probably 4chan. It might be Twitter at this point. I don't know. I haven't been on Twitter in years. I haven't had one in like a decade. Uh, but it's possible that after I guess people stop getting kicked off or something, that there has been base conversation there. But it's mostly, again, it's probably in some corner, some inaccessible recess corner of that people are actually having truly invigorating conversation, because most of the rest of the conversations that people have, and this is just a larger issue in general, is like with these podcasters. I've seen there's too many fucking all the podcasters are too sycophantic. They agree with each other too much. Like if you have a podcast co-host, there needs to be more like back and forth. Like I feel like anyone who starts a podcast now, it's always like, yep, right, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and building on what he said, it's like it's basically like, yeah, and yes, and well, like, yes, I agree. And I think it needs to be more of like, either like, again, people being natural and normal and not like forcing these weird, like covering these topics that they both obviously agree about. But then, like, I don't know, more questions, more like even stories, anecdotal stories, more kind of not tension, but just more like disagreement between. I just like if you're starting a podcast with somebody, it shouldn't be so like yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like there should be less. There's too much agreement in general. So if you're gonna start a fucking podcast, at least do it with somebody that you can argue with and make it interesting. And maybe people like the whole agreement thing. I just think it's boring. It doesn't really go anywhere. It's just it goes in circles. But anyway, that's it. I'll wrap it up for this time. Thanks for watching. Peace out.